Guys, it's Joel, and I wanted to do a quick video on politics because a lot of people have asked me to do that. This isn't really endorsing any sort of political point, but the point is to look at kind of what is the energy that is underneath politics, maybe. What are some of the complexes that drive our political system? And so a lot of these have been getting really long. I'll try and keep this fast. One of the things that I see a whole lot is that if you sort of have undealt with trauma, basically, or developmental neuroses from childhood, and then you don't ever do self-work to look at that, it affects your self-image. It affects the part of yourself that you're allowed to be, that you're allowed to hold, and that becomes a little bit too restrictive. So your shadow becomes all of these things that are really, probably good things. In Jungian psychology, they call this the golden shadow. It's not the kind of dark, negative energies in the shadow that you're projecting onto other people, but it's the things that I really would like to learn to be able to be, but I don't feel like I'm allowed to do that. So one of the ways that you see the golden shadow be projected is if I learn in childhood I'm not allowed to be creative, or I'm not allowed to be smart, or I'm not allowed to be independent, then maybe or whatever they are, I'm not allowed to do that. So until I reclaim that, it gets projected. And you see that when all of a sudden, oh my gosh, this person is so creative, or they're so smart, or they're just amazing artist. So if you're doing that a lot, where maybe this person is smart or interesting or brave or whatever it is, but all of a sudden it's too much, that's how you kind of know that you're in a shadow complex. And maybe the reason that you're seeing these people as a little bit too much of that is because you're not willing to develop that seed in you. And that you see that in them because you have that capacity. If you didn't have that capacity, you would see something else. So the way that this affects politics, right, is that if I'm coming from a household where I'm more of a victim, I'm not allowed to be strong, I maybe have to identify with a persecuted class or something. And that doesn't mean that the struggle is right or wrong here. I'm not saying that this is accurate or inaccurate. It's just something about self-perception. If I come from a childhood where I am not allowed to be strong, where I maybe over-identify with vulnerability. Maybe I over-identify with vulnerability to the point that I think, well, I'm always going to be persecuted. I'm not really allowed to be as successful as these other people. And maybe I even project my own need to be saved, my own need to be helped, if I'm not willing to do that self-work, onto people who don't even deserve it. People who maybe have done bad stuff, or they're not interested in receiving help, or they're not good people, and they're not willing to become good people. And I project that out, and I'm always trying to help these people, right? If that kind of energy is undealt with, that comes from this sense of vulnerability that is unresolved, then what happens is that you skew a little bit left politically. And that isn't to say that it's wrong to be left at all. I don't think it is. I think that's very good in some ways. But what happens is that you have to be able to deal with your own vulnerability, to heal yourself, to deal with your own stuff, or else your politics becomes something that is a projection and isn't healthy. And it stops you from seeing what your politics actually are. Now, what makes you skew right is being out of touch with vulnerability. Maybe you're not allowed to hurt as a kid. You have to be strong. In fact, even to have emotion or to be weak is shameful and bad. And so what's underneath the sort of right-wing complex is not going to be vulnerability. It's not going to be this feeling of like sensitivity or vulnerability. It's going to be this feeling of deep shame that vulnerability ever existed. Maybe I hate the vulnerability in myself so much that I project that and I attack vulnerable people. I attack vulnerable populations to the point of hurting them because I think they're inferior, they're bad, they're not perfect, they're not good, they're not. And you start to see how that complex comes out. And just like I'm projecting my hatred of my own sensitive, vulnerable, victimized parts, because a lot of times, just as much as the left, somebody who is wildly right-wing is going to have a lot of trauma too. They're just not going to see it as trauma. They may see it as that they deserved it or that it was a good thing. You also see with that this projection of this great, perfect, wonderful self that is not shameful, that I'm supposed to be striving for. And so you get that a ton of times where people pick one attribute, their race, their religion, their masculinity, their femininity, their something about them, and then they say, well, this thing is perfect, it's going to hold my golden shadow. Maybe it's a group, but a lot of times it's a leader. And so all of a sudden this person becomes more powerful, more wonderful, more good. Now, keep in mind here, this doesn't mean Democrat, Republican when I say left, right. It means progressive, conservative. And so, like, there are progressive people on the right, just like there are conservative people on the left. Who you're voting for doesn't mean that one of these complexes isn't going on. Usually it's probably going to push you in one way politically, but a lot of this has to do with your nurture too, not just your inborn way that you're handling vulnerability or handling shame. So this is kind of a complex idea, but it's something that people ask a lot, and I was trying to figure out a way to say that would maybe be helpful so that people could help their patients and help themselves. That's one of the things that I notice. Of course, these dynamics are going on in everybody. So it's not like I'm exempt from any of these things or that anyone else is. It's something just like everything else in Jungian psychology. When you recognize it, then you can analyze it and notice it, and you're in control of it. And when you don't notice it, and when you can't analyze it, then it is in control of you. So I hope that's helpful. And it's really cold. I've just walked to my work, so I'm going to go inside. You guys have a good day, and I'll talk to you soon.